Welcome back to the Peach Teach English podcast. I'm Frankie Mesmer, your host, and today I have my guest Kevin with Atlaz. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello everyone. It's good to see all of you today. And thanks a lot, Frankie, for inviting me to your podcast. This is truly an honor for me. My name is Kevin. So I am currently the Chief Product Officer at Atlaz. So basically, I'm in charge of all our English books.
Thank you, Kevin. And where are you from?
I am originally from Jakarta, Indonesia. But then when I was in college, I went to the States. So I spent roughly about 8 years being in Washington State as well as in Los Angeles. Then I went back here and I continued my career in the education industry.
Can you tell us your experience with working in education?
Yeah, at first I started off as an English teacher. Then after roughly about 1.5 years, I was promoted to become, it's called a senior teaching manager, but basically like the head of academic in my branch at the time. Then after that, probably around 2 or 3 years later, I was taken to this company called Atlaz. So we actually focus on providing English books for any kinds of setting.
Thank you, Kevin. Today, guys, we're going to focus on the topic of functional language. So, my first question for you, Kevin, is what is functional language? Could you define that for us?
What functional language is basically when we are using the language to communicate. So I think to me, what it is not is memorization. That's the first thing. Or maybe trying to copy and paste stuff. That's basically surface level type of learning. But functional is deeper. So we're no longer seeing it as, oh, it's a subject that I need to learn or to study, but we actually want to use the language itself so we can maybe use it in our day to day conversations or maybe to study or to work as well.
To add to that, let's say you need some medical English vocabulary. We actually want to build the skills that we need to make a doctor's appointment or tell your doctor, I have this problem.
Right.
Instead of just memorizing those words, you can actually develop the structures you need to go do those tasks. So I would say that is functional language. And now let's look at the next question, which is why does this matter? Why should we focus more on functional language than just memorizing vocabulary and grammar?
One of the biggest issues is like, how can I speak more fluently? It won't be achieved by just memorizing because I think it will take a long time for us to have to formulate correct sentences if we have to think of it maybe word by word or even like sentence by sentence. So we have to actually see it from a bigger picture. So that's why like functional language comes into play here. A lot of the most conventional way of teaching, especially right now in Indonesia, that I'm still trying to tackle in the meantime as well. When I speak to teachers, when they're teaching at school, it always is about a list of grammatical rules, memorizing which tenses to use, memorizing the different verb forms. So it's all about just memorizing and maybe filling in the blanks or answering questions. But when it comes to us having to use it as we are speaking, or maybe even when we're writing, students may struggle, or even teachers may even find themselves struggling when they have to teach their students or to converse with their students effectively in class. So I guess this probably is the biggest reason why we should focus more on functional language, maybe than the traditional way of doing it in the past, or maybe even right now in certain countries that we're still doing it that way.
And just curious here, Kevin, when you lived in the US, how old were you?
I think I was 18 at the time.
So you were an adult. Okay. I'm going to tell a story here to show why functional language matters. And if you have your own, you can add one. So, yeah, I'm an American living in Colombia, South America, right? So I have to speak Spanish when I go do any activity, socializing, going to the doctor, etc. And one time I had to go to the doctor and I needed an IV. And so I got my IV, and then the doctor came to me, and I'm just going to say the phrase in Spanish for the context. They told me, te doy la alta. And I had never heard that phrase before. If I literally translate it, it's like, I give you the high. And so I'm over here like, I guess they'll just come back and tell me what I need. I didn't really understand what was going on. And then so I waited there for like an hour, and then the woman came back to me and she was like, "I told you you could go home." And I'm like, "Oh, that's what that expression means." So I waited an extra hour at the doctor for no reason because I didn't have this common functional doctor phrase that they use. So, for one, being able to have functional language just helps you do the tasks that you need to do effectively, not be confused. And yeah, I probably knew how to say "go home," but that's not the phrase that she used, and I was confused. Did you have any stories like this in your experience, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I have quite a few, but I just try to remember which one is worth mentioning here because I studied business when I was in the States. So there were a lot of classes that involve a lot of functional language there as well. For example, let's say studying law, right? Especially this is not just talking about law in general, but this is US law. So it's a lot of struggling for me to have to understand the concept at first and then put it into practice to see it in what it would be like if I have to work in that kind of setting. And I don't think it's just law, even something technical. I had to take data analysis as well. And some of the time, like the professors will be using some idioms or things like that that are also very specific towards the subject that we were talking about. And I was struggling to understand what that was. But then as I was talking to my friends and it actually meant this way, I was like, oh, okay. It's because I took it literally. And I feel like it's not something that is probably textbook based that you would be learning, but it's something that you experience, right? Because I think the phrase itself, it also embodies like the culture that you are in. Because maybe in other places that also speak the same language, they wouldn't be saying the same thing. So I think, yeah, what you said is really interesting because I did have a lot of that kind of experience now that I'm thinking about it.
Thank you for sharing, Kevin. So, guys, we're going to move on to the next section. I'm basically breaking this down into 4 categories. You would need functional language for work, travel, daily tasks, and social interactions. Let's start with this first topic, work. Okay. Kevin, can you think of any functional language we need for work?
Yes, when I started working in the States, I used to live in LA. So we had a lot of people from different countries. So one of the things that we had to agree on is some of the terminologies, because I used to work in film and in music as well. So they have all these terminologies that I was not aware of. And they use it as if it's something that is very common. I think it would be best you prepare yourself before coming into that industry. For example, let's say understanding like what is a timesheet? Maybe if we call timesheet in my workplace right now, timesheet would be like when you clock in, when you clock out. But in a film setting, for example, a timesheet is like a call sheet or timesheet is basically when you want the actresses to be arriving at what time, and then maybe for different departments when they are expected to come to the set, that kind of stuff. So I think the first thing about work is the terminology. And the second one, I would say the idioms, because they might use certain jargons when you're working in certain types of industry. Maybe it's not crucial for you to have it, but it's good if you want to mingle with other people and try to get more connection with people around you.
Yes, for sure. So, some functional language skills for work, right? Networking that you're touching on here is really good. You need to just be able to start a nice conversation, break the ice, but know how to keep it professional. What kind of structures and grammar do you need to keep it professional, right? Not just memorizing random grammar and structures. You need to be able to start meetings, speak up in meetings. Perhaps you need to leave a review or you need to ask a client for feedback. Maybe you even work with English speaking clients and you need to be able to explain your whole business or service to them in English. So, really, there's a lot of useful functional language related to work. And I would like to include our audience here. What kind of functional language do you need for your job? Go ahead, Shahid.
If we talk about the work environment, there are two basic areas we need to focus on. One is meetings. In meetings, we have to discuss ideas. And the second one is getting prepared for interview. You must be able to convince other people why you are a perfect match for this job. Why should we hire you? So these are two areas.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
I agree, especially adding on the interviews, Shahid. We need to be familiar with the specific like language that's used in interviews. And I would say a functional skill, right? Being able to highlight your strengths, be able to tell them like things you have accomplished in your past
Sure.
jobs. Thank you, Shahid. Anybody?
Hey, everybody.
Shahid, you're an accountant, correct?
Yeah, I'm working as an accountant.
So, what kind of functional English do you need to be an accountant?
Invoices, we have to deal with them. For example, we have to understand for journal entries, for their income statement. So English is very important around the world.
Right, for sure. Vocabulary around like taxes. You need also like law. You have to understand tax law. Let's move on to the second topic, which is functional language for travel. So, Kevin, what would be examples of functional language for travel?
When I was still probably 14 or 15 years old, I went to Disneyland. I really paid attention to first when I was in the airplane was a lot of rules and regulations because it's actually for your own safety. Also, if you go to places in the world that maybe you don't speak their language, to have at least the very basic thing that you need to know is some of the precautions. For example, in Indonesia, let's say you go to certain maybe sacred places here, you have to be very careful before going there, even though like it's all fun and beautiful. But of course, to understand and to respect the culture, you need to know what is prohibited, what is not. So I guess that's the first thing. The next one is actually for you to be able to fully experience your travel experience itself is you need to have some sort of that communication ability. That's where the functional skill comes to play because you will have to communicate with the local people there, right? So you want to understand what is the history behind the places there, or you want to know what are their customs and things like that.
Yes, great examples, Kevin. We need to be able to ask for direction, understand those directions, be able to go to restaurants and order food. What is the language that we need to accomplish all these tasks? I also like how you said respecting the local culture. When you learn the language, you're able to do that better. There's a lot of skills we need when we travel. Maybe you have an emergency. You need to be able to call an ambulance or the police. Yeah, you need to be able to buy a bus ticket. So there are a lot of functional language and skills that we can learn when we travel. Let's look at the next one, which is just like daily tasks that we need to do. So, can you think of some examples like this, Kevin?
I think one of the functional language thing that we can really consider is the appropriate register that we want to use. For example, is it more polite to say, I'd like some water or I want some water? It's a very simple thing, but I did realize just something that is very impactful in my own personal English learning journey myself is to be able to distinguish the two of them because then I would know when to use which proper register. I think colloquialism is another important thing to discuss as well is to understand that sometimes when we speak to our friends or maybe to anybody in English, then we won't be speaking to them as if we were reading stuff from our textbook. By understanding that's the way the local people use the language, that's the kind of functional language that I have to use. So then it takes you to the next step of the learning process itself, like how to say it appropriately, correctly, grammatically speaking, but then to be able to use it in a functional way that actually works for that culture, for that place that you're in. I think that's a different stage. And I think it will be better for you to also fit into the culture itself.
This is really a big step in fluency, Kevin.
Right. Yes.
You know, you can probably reach low intermediate level just sticking to the textbook, but if you really want to get to that higher level, you got to start interacting and you realize like the merging sounds. We're not going to say
Yes.
did you, we're going to say did you. And if you're not studying in this way, you're going to hear did you and you're going to be like what are you talking about? I didn't hear did you. Yeah? And like you said, also just the colloquialisms, the slang, this is really going to help you feel more natural, for one, when you're
Exactly.
interacting, but also be able to understand what's going on. So I didn't think about that one in the beginning, but it's a really good tip. And I think just other tasks, as I mentioned a little bit, like going to the doctor, you'll need to go to the bank. Like you said, maybe there's a legal problem, so it's things related to law, going to the grocery store. All of these things are daily tasks that you need to be
Yeah.
able to do and communicate effectively. Would anyone like to share some more functional language for your daily tasks?
I completely agree with Kevin. We have to be responsible. I want to go to the doctor. First, you have to book an appointment. We have to consult whatever type of doctor you want to go with. So we have to check how much cash you have in the bank. Then once you book in an appointment, then later on, you have to pay the receptionist. Then later on, the nurse will call you. Then later on, doctors will tell you what type of medicine you want. Then you have to go to a pharmacy.
Thank you very much, Shahid. You made me think of some more ideas, right? Maybe you need to buy a car. Maybe you need to ask for a refund. You need to have the vocabulary and like the structures to be able to communicate your ideas effectively. The last one here is for social interactions. Okay. So, Kevin, what's your advice here?
So actually, like we put jokes to be one of the highest levels in Atlas books. I was trying to understand like why put jokes as like the highest fluency type of material. Like I would think of joke is easy, right? But then it turns out there's so much to the understanding, like how to maybe create some sort of jokes or how to understand jokes. Because it's one of the things as well, if you're maybe living in the US or any English speaking country, and let's say you don't really understand jokes, people think you're being too serious, for example. So, of course, it also matters towards our social interaction as well, right? Because the jokes, I think, are a big part of any culture. So, to be able to understand a joke, I think you need to have that sort of high level of fluency as well. Because there's like puns, for example. I used to not understand like what puns were. Let's say when, especially American people, they use a lot of pun jokes, right? They even call it punny jokes and I was like, what was that? But then now I understand what each one of the jokes means. And then I can come to my friends making jokes or even understanding Netflix shows because a lot of Netflix, they also use a lot of this kind of jokes. And the next one is as simple as to communicate to people around you, right? Because especially if you're living abroad or maybe working in a multinational company, like one of my friends is also an accountant and he has to work with people from other countries as well. So obviously he needs to know how to greet properly in English. Maybe a difference between saying hello in an email, maybe how to say dear Mr. Someone, right? Obviously, we need to know, should we use their last name or first name? Especially in Indonesia, we use the first name. That's why people here call me Mr. Kevin or Miss Karina, right? But maybe when I was in the States, when I went to college, for example, we always call the professor by their last name, maybe like Professor Mesmer, for example. We don't say Professor Frankie. It's not wrong, but it just sounds unnatural and people won't be using it that way. So I guess like it matters in that kind of sense. So again, to fit into the culture, to also be maybe I would say merging with everyone around you. I think that's what matters so much.
Yes, great tips, Kevin. And in addition to that, I would say being able to invite people to your house. Also, like knowing the culture, like you said, and maybe some boundaries you shouldn't cross in that culture as well. Just being able to carry on small talk with people, maybe politely rejecting an invitation to do something. All of these are really important in social interactions. I'd like us to move on to the next section. And basically, that is how can we study functional language, Kevin?
So I think one of the things is we have to immerse into the language itself. So I think we need to take it further, not just seeing the language as something that we're studying, but also what we can experience. You have to understand their culture. You have to understand like how they speak. So it takes not just reading it from the textbook and be able to say it or memorize, but also to be fully there in that situation. And for the English teachers, I think what you want to do is you have to provide that kind of setting for your students as well, right? So it doesn't mean you have to be in America for you to have a good English. I do have a lot of English students that actually speak even better English than myself, and they haven't even been to other countries. Don't limit your students to just be in that box, thinking like, okay, you have to learn it this way or that way. even if you have to find some materials for your students, you want to find something that is also appropriate. So you grade it according to the difficulty level, but as well as also inputting some authentic materials, because one of the important things is they need to see how it looks like in real life, right? So that's why, like in Atlas books, we put real materials such as like how to write a cover letter, how to write a CV in English, what sort of language you want to use, what sort of vocabulary, so you can make a good CV. I think all of that matters a lot.
Really great tips, Kevin. And to add on to that, I think whether you are the student or the tutor, knowing why the student wants to learn English.
Yeah, their motivation, right?
Yes, the motivation. What do they need it for? Because sometimes people are just like, to get more opportunities. But what opportunities are you trying to get? And why is English going to help you get that opportunity? And what skills do you need to make that possible? And interviews is a common one. Using corporate lingo or the business lingo that you need for that specific career. All of these are very important. So I would even consider asking yourself or your student, let's make a list of situations that you need English and let's prepare for those. I will notice though, like some more advanced students, they're often very good at using English in those situations. They struggle more in just the conversational, casual situations because they don't practice that as much as the business situations. So it's also identifying, where am I struggling? What do I not know? I think sometimes we want to study what we know because it's comfortable. But if you really want to improve, you should be learning something new every class. That's how you get better. And also, AI, it can give us instant ideas for this, right? Give me a list of ideas of situations I might need to use English and check them or cross them off. Which ones do you need? And then you can ask it to help you prepare for that vocabulary, the structures. And really, the best way to get better at it is to practice with a teacher. And then from there, you got to go use it. Don't just keep it in the classroom or on the paper or with AI, because you're not practicing to interact with AI. You're practicing to interact with real people. That's my next question, Kevin. In the new Atlas adult book, what kind of functional language and skills are in that material?
That's a great question. I can share a little bit about the new Atlas adult books. This is called English Upgrade. So this is specifically for business English. All our books are divided based on their CFR levels. For most people who are just entering the workforce, maybe getting ready to work, we have all the functional language that we talk about: how to write email properly, how to greet someone in English, how to introduce yourself in English, and how to write a CV, cover letter, and all of that. So those are for the A1 and A2. We will be developing the ones talking about English that is being used for specific job roles. For example, medical purposes, for law, or for accountants. Then we'll be moving on to becoming a leader, an entrepreneur, where you're taking even the final step of fluency of English, using it in a work setting. In all our books and our system, you will have AI that will help you a lot. It is also helpful because we have assessments that are also auto-graded. Everything that you're doing will be graded automatically, including the writing and the speaking as well. So for the students, they can just do everything by themselves, and there will be the AI giving them feedback. As the teachers, you will have access to everything. So you can add or edit the scores or the comments.
Right now, I'm using Atlas with one of my teenage students. She's B1 plus level, and we're halfway through with it. I asked her yesterday what she thought of the material, and she says it's one of the best that she's used.
Great.
So, Atlas also has materials for children and teenagers as well. So, whatever the level, whatever the age, there is something there for you. One thing I really like is the lesson plan feature. It saves me a lot of time. And then they get to practice their reading, listening, grammar, vocabulary, writing, speaking. They're really developing all these skills. The quizzes and the tests, super easy to use. I highly recommend it. And my student is also enjoying it very much. Does anybody want to ask Kevin or me any questions about functional language or the Atlas materials? Ooh, this is a good question. So it says, hello there, Frankie and Kevin. As a tutor, I tend to teach a lot of grammar in class, but my students do not seem to improve their English. How can I fix this? I do think there's two parts to this. As we often say, you can take the horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're being a bad tutor. If they're not like actively trying to remember and use the grammar, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. So be kind to yourself. It doesn't mean you're the problem. But we should assess, is there something I can do better? Generally, I don't like to teach around grammar. I like to teach around a skill, a functional skill. And if that connects to the grammar, great. Oftentimes, when they're using that skill, you start to realize their knowledge about this grammar is not very good. Let me now teach them this grammar because they need it. It's relevant. And when something is relevant, for one, they have more incentive to want to learn it, and it helps them remember it. So that's my big tip for you. Okay. Do you want to add something, Kevin?
Sure. I think adding on to that is maybe like one thing that I learned early as an English teacher is not to just teach the grammar structures themselves, but also as the function. So, for example, one of the things I like to do is called chunking. I used to teach students from 3 years old all the way to adults, right? So, let's say I'm teaching some children. Then I cannot tell them like I is a subject, right? Or am is a verb. I can't do that because they don't understand all those concepts yet. So I basically drilled them a lot with the structures themselves. I use also total physical response, do some movements. Let's say, what is it? Right? They have to answer, it's an apple, for example, or it's an orange. So they always understand they need to answer using that kind of structure. That also helps to build the fluency. One of the things as well in a lot of Asian countries, we tend to just answer in words. It's part of our cultures as well. Same when somebody asks, what is it? Pen. What is it? Phone. What is it? Water. Then we tend to not build on our fluency that way because we don't actually use the structure. I also use that to teach adults as well when I had to teach, let's say, really difficult, complex grammatical structures, for example, using something called third conditional. So let's say we have to use had plus past participle, right? So a lot of my students were like, I can't do this, mister. And then when we see like the structure, it's too difficult, too complex. So then we try to chunk it, right? So we say maybe, what would you have done if you had blah, blah, blah? Then you have to always answer, if I had blah, 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 I would have blah, 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 blah. So they just remember those basic structures and just fill in the blanks to start with. And that will help. And then later on, they can use it in real life and not just memorize it, but also retain that information so that when they have to use it in the future, in real life, real context, they can also use that.
And going off of that, Kevin, there are some students, and if you are this student, think about it, analyze yourself. They just give those 1 to 3 word, and maybe even native speakers would answer like that. But reality is, you're in class to improve your level. And if you're just answering in 1 or 3 words, you're doing what's easy and you're not actually using the new structure. So, really, you as the student, you need to push yourself to use new structures, vocabulary. And as a teacher, we need to push them to say more than just 1 or 3 words. So I am a fresh graduate from English Education Study, how to build self-confidence to start teaching English to students, specifically for teaching English as foreign language. So go ahead, you can start first with this one, Kevin.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Frankie. So I think one of the tips that I want to give is I think when it comes to teaching English as a foreign language, we need to understand how it's going to be different than teaching it as a second language or even as a first language, because we need to understand the kind of environment our students will be in. Will they be in a lot of maybe English speaking environments, or maybe they only are in an English environment when they're with you, right? Obviously, they will have very minimal exposure to English. So all you need to do is not just to think about what you can have in your class, but how to increase that exposure for your students as well. So that's why we had this conversation when I first met Frankie as well. I was asking her how she would teach her class. She made her own modules. It's very interesting and also very effective because she had to adapt it to every single student that it will be like very meaningful for them. So you have to understand like what kind of environment your students will be in. If they are not exposed to a lot of English, you have to give them a lot of exposure. Same with when I started teaching adults first time as well. I told them like you have to listen to songs, you have to watch movies. It's okay with subtitles, but get used to just watching English speaking movies. And you will be surprised how many people actually, if they don't speak English, they prefer not to listen to English speaking movies. So they tend to have it dubbed in their local language. So try to get them like, okay, maybe don't try to listen to the dub one. Maybe you can use the subtitle, but get used to listen to some English speaking language. It's also making sure that they have this like muscle memory because it's not just about understanding like the words, but also what it's supposed to sound like. It's almost like music to me because I like music and I like language. I think every language has their own rhythm, right? So you have to understand this is what kind of rhythm, let's say English with American accent, English with Australian accent. And also when it comes to speaking, then you understand, oh, this is how the intonation falls, it rises, it helps you a lot and it makes the learning process more effortless.
I totally agree. And adding on to that, you have to put yourself in the student's shoes, right? Why are they not confident? Why are they nervous? I actually have a podcast episode about this if you want to check it out. But basically, I would say generally they're worried about making mistakes. They're worried about sounding funny with their pronunciation. Maybe they're not going to understand what the other person says. I find a lot of students are ashamed to tell me they don't understand something, and we have to make them feel comfortable. And again, you as the student, never be ashamed of your mistakes, your pronunciation, that you don't know something. You are learning. And the worst thing you can do is pretend you understand because you're not going to get better when you're pretending. You have to say, huh, what is that? Tell me what is that? And then you learn it. Now you have new vocabulary, correct pronunciation, better grammar. Maybe it seems like it wouldn't build their confidence when we correct them, but it actually does because they're fixing it. And when they know they're doing things correctly, they become more confident. And at the same time, they become comfortable making mistakes. And so they just go make mistakes and learn from them and become more confident. So that's my biggest tip there. Any final comments, Kevin?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks a lot for inviting me to this podcast. I think it's been a long time since anybody asked me about my experience in learning English and teaching English. So I think it's really good experience for me to be having this podcast with you. If you want to ask any questions about Atlas, feel free to reach out to us and we will be in touch with you really soon. I think that's it. Thanks a lot, Frankie.
Thank you guys. And really, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here today. Make sure you check out Atlas, they're great. I have a blog here where I explain the functional language. If you're a student, you can sign up for a free courtesy call and we can talk about my class options and create the best plan to help you improve your English fluency. And see you at the next event. Bye, guys.
Bye bye. Thank you.